Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for taking part in this very special event. And particularly, I want to thank Mitch Fraser and Tories for generously hosting it. As mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to have known our two aspiring members of Parliament, Michael Levitt and Anthony Housefather, for a good part of my life. Anthony since our time together in elementary school in Montreal, and Michael for most of my 20 years in Toronto. The Liberal Party, and indeed Canada, is fortunate to have individuals of their high caliber, willing to commit to setting out on a path to public service. I feel that too few do so, and I really applaud them both. Public service can not only be an honorable calling, but it occasionally produces individuals who accomplish truly great things. This leads me to the introduction of our very special guest, the Honourable Irwin Cotler. It is said that for a man to be humble, he need not be someone who has plenty to be humble about. In fact, the opposite is more often true. The greater the man, the more humble he is likely to be. Perhaps more than any individual in public life, past or present, Irwin Cotler exemplifies a unique melding of intellect and compassion, of heart and mind, of greatness and humility. International human rights lawyer, counsel to prisoners of conscience, peace activist, member of parliament, former minister of justice and attorney general, constitutional and comparative law scholar, and most significant to me, teacher and professor. I was first privileged to personally experience both this man's great heart and mind while a law student at McGill, where he was an esteemed professor. This was back in the early 1990s, and I was presenting a mock appeal. As chance would have it, Professor Cotler was one of the three individuals listening to my presentation. Needless to say, these things can be a stressful event in the life of a law student. When I finished my presentation, Professor Cotler, in that measured tone of voice and reasoned manner we've all come to know and respect over the years, thanked me for my efforts, praised me for what I had covered well, and gently listed 10 things that I could have done better. Each point interrelated and building upon the other. I was in shock and awe. More importantly, I walked out thinking that this is an individual I could learn from, and not just about the law. I asked if I could follow up with him to learn in greater detail how I might have done better, and characteristically he said yes. I ended up taking a number of his courses and working for him as a researcher in the summer. It was an invaluable mentorship. To this day, he has had an enormous impact on the way I look at the world and the decisions I make. Professor Cotler was recently interviewed by the Globe and Mail on the occasion of his having been named the inaugural winner of the Law Society of Upper Canada Human Rights Award. In that interview, he spoke of the influence of his parents. His father taught him as a child, among other things, that the pursuit of justice is equal to all of the other commandments combined. And it was in this vein that he got deeply involved in two of the great human rights struggles of the second half of the 20th century, the struggle for Soviet Jewry and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And we all know that these struggles were successfully resolved. Professor Cotler's advocacy, including his campaign to shame governments into recognizing the oppressive nature of their regimes, mobilized support and helped lead to the freedom of such iconic figures like Natan Sharansky and Nelson Mandela. Professor Cotler's advocacy for peace and human rights is just as strong today as it ever was. Sadly, there are still plenty of political prisoners all over the world who have been wrongfully detained for simply exercising the freedoms that we here in Canada often take for granted. Many of these prisoners have in fact disappeared or perished. Professor Cotler gives these brave individuals a voice, and he carries their torch. An example of this is Sergei Magnitsky, a Russian lawyer and fraud investigator who uncovered evidence of a major theft of tax money by government officials and was arrested for it himself, imprisoned, beaten, and left to languish for 358 days before he died in jail at the age of 37. This past month, Professor Cotler's motion calling for a Magnitsky law to sanction Russian officials for domestic human rights violations won unanimous backing in the House of Commons. Whether it has been transforming the Supreme Court of Canada into the most gender representative in the world in his capacity as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, advocating for peace in the Middle East, or advocating on behalf of the dispossessed anywhere in the world, his voice has been strong and it has been heard. All of this carried out in the simple pursuit of justice. Has any son better followed his father's advice? Professor Cotler once taught me, if I ever wonder what I can do in a world that can often make us feel cynical or even indifferent, to recall the words of the great sage Maimonides. He suggested we look at the world as if it is exactly half good and half evil. If we look at it that way, and I tell my own children this now, then one good deed, be it helping someone across the street or stopping bullying, can tip that scale. This provides hope that we can all help repair the human condition. And no one has done so more than the man I'm introducing, a man who transcends politics but embodies the conscience of a nation. I give you a great yet modest man and a good friend and teacher, Irwin Cotler.